Hey everyone, Beletsky here again with an update to my last video. If you haven't watched it, then this won't make as much sense, so find it linked in the video description. Thanks to everyone who watched that one, it miraculously grew to almost my most viewed of all time in a little over a day, which was very cool to see. In the comments of that video, people pointed out some things I forgot to mention, some criticisms, and even one spot where I completely underrated Alfred myself, so I figured a quick update was in order. There were 5 threads that really stood out to me, so those are the 5 that I'll be going over here, in ascending order of importance. Quick note, this video is again in the context of Maddening with DLC. The first thing I wanted to address was my comparison to Binding Blade Marcus. Several people seem to get upset that I was comparing a unit that can basically take on armies to Alfred, who while I argue to be useful, is still mortal and only a cog in the machine. My point wasn't to say that Alfred can carry as hard as Marcus, nor that Alfred is as necessary as Marcus in the context of his own game. My point was that, like Marcus, Alfred is good for a significant portion of the game, and even if he may steal some experience and gets benched later on, that doesn't detract from how useful he is. Most people accept that Marcus is a good unit even if he totally falls off a cliff. I don't see why Alfred getting benched should plunge him into bottom tier. Another criticism I read was that Alfred was only good because I put Sigurd's Ring on him, or because I upgraded his Steel Lance, and that was invalid as units should be compared at their baseline. I think this is an incredibly stupid take. In Fire Emblem Awakening, Lucina comes with a very powerful personal weapon, the Parallel Falchion. In a game where steel swords only have 8 might, Lucina can use this 12 might weapon with 5 crit, which is effective against dragons, has unlimited uses, and can be used to heal 20 HP. Should we say Lucina isn't a good unit, she's only good because you're using the Parallel Falchion on her? No, that would be ridiculous. This is an option available to the character. Analysis should include access to that option and how it changes her performance. Now, Sigurd's Ring is slightly different, as you can actually use Sigurd's Ring on other characters. Let's use another example. Binding Blade Marcus comes with a Silver Lance. While he's the only unit currently able to use it, if you save it then other characters will be able to use it later on, and every time Marcus uses it is one less time that someone else can. Should we completely disregard the Silver Lance when evaluating Marcus? Would anyone say, well, without the Silver Lance he can't one-shot Cavaliers, he can't pull you out of that pinch without it, he's not actually as good as people say, you just let him use the Silver Lance? I doubt it. Generally people understand that the Silver Lance is a good option, and sometimes that option is best used to kill a Cavalier that's threatening to kill Clarine in Chapter 4, even if someone else gets to use it less. In exactly the same way, it would be stupid to analyze 2 units against each other, completely ignoring Sigurd's Ring. Someone is getting Sigurd's Ring. One of your units will be using it. So it's much better and more practical to analyze the entire team with Sigurd on one character versus the same entire team with Sigurd on a different character. Like I said in the last video, I think Louis doesn't need Sigurd to be good, and Chloe is better served by Edelgard. This setup is best compared to every other permutation of setups between these 3 characters, so Alfred gets Sigurd's Ring. As for the Lance, I don't know what else to tell you. I once again repeat my point about using options available to you, and also add, dude, the forge cost 500 gold, it was nothing, especially if you use dogs for ingots. The next prominent argument that I've heard is that Alfred steals experience and isn't strictly necessary. Early game Maddening is easy, so using him is a waste and you should instead feed your long-term characters. Now, don't get me wrong, I cry for 10 years every time my Jagan gets a kill in every Fire Emblem game. But when it really comes down to it, that's a fallacy. Or a pitfall, if you will. By the end of early game, my most used characters were pushing level 15 and gaining something like 8 experience per kill a lot of the time, and that was while giving kills to multiple characters that I ultimately had to bench, like Alfred, Alchrist, Yunaka, and Saline. Could I have played even more meticulously and ensured that every possible kill was going to long-term units? Sure, but that wouldn't have gotten me very far. With XP rates as they are in Maddening, I would be incredibly surprised if it would result in more than a few extra level ups total between those units, and with how XP scaling works, this would just result in those units gaining even less experience when getting kills all throughout mid-game, bringing them closer to the average as time goes on. Eventually, say 4 extra levels would be reduced to 3, and then 2. Even if absolutely perfect play results in 2 or 3 extra level ups per character by endgame, which I think is an incredibly generous assumption, that'll result in around 1 to 1.5 extra points in every stat. With all the options available to you in this game like skill inheritance, forged weapons, class changing, and chain attacks, if less than 2 points in most stats ultimately ends up being the difference between easy and impossible late game, all the way through, I will eat my socks on camera. It's just not going to happen. Furthermore, and I'd say far more importantly, listen, I get it. You like being good at Fire Emblem, you take pride in finishing every game on Lunatic, it feels good to be an elitist sometimes. I share a lot of those same feelings. But as at least one content creator has shown me, though they will remain nameless, not everyone is as good at Fire Emblem as you. And that's okay. If using Alfred makes Maddening more accessible for someone who would otherwise never touch the difficulty, allowing someone to beat chapters they otherwise wouldn't have, using him is valid. There's another small YouTuber I discovered a bit ago named PannolinoBambino, a highly underrated Fire Emblem content creator who puts out tons of videos every month. He's put out multiple series called low-tier Iron Mans, or Iron Men. It's multiple Iron Men, but Iron Man is kind of a title rather than describing a man or men. I'm just gonna go with Iron Mans. To my knowledge, he's completed Iron Mans of both... No, that doesn't sound right. To my knowledge, he's completed Iron Men of both FE7 and FE8 on the hardest difficulty, using only units that are ranked C tier and below, ignoring all the good units in the game, or even the slightly above average ones. If something as absurd as that is possible, I'm pretty sure people will be okay being slightly less than perfect about their experience gains and engage. So relax. Do definitely check out PannolinoBambino though. He makes great content including playthroughs, tier lists, and tutorials, and I would love to see him garner more success. I'll link his channel in the description. Open that in another tab to check out after this video, why don't you? Fourth, Amber. This comparison write-up ended up much more verbose than I expected, so buckle in. As soon as it was mentioned, I couldn't believe I forgot to talk about Amber. Honestly, while making my last video, I didn't even remember that Amber existed, as he was the quickest ever bench for me and I never looked back. The main takeaways of the criticism I received is that Amber's strength and speed are higher than Alfred's, even if trained, at the cost of only a few points of defense, so he replaces Alfred and should be given Sigurd instead. Better than Alfred? Who? This guy? Oh no, my horsey. Oh my horsey, I can't control my horsey's carrying me away, guys, what do I do? And people think Alfred's personality is bad. Anyway, the numbers are right, but I disagree on the conclusion. We need to add context. First, let's look at the stats. Amber recruits himself in Chapter 8, during which my Alfred was level 11. We'll get HP, Dex, and Luck out of the way and call those virtually equal, since 1 point in those isn't worth much. Amber comes with 3 higher strength, and although Alfred's personal skill can sometimes close this gap, it doesn't work on player phase, so I'll count that as negligible. This gives Amber slightly more damage, but he doesn't double, and in my experience Alfred did enough damage on retaliation to set up kills, and enough damage when charging with momentum to one-shot squishy units like mages using his, say it with me now, +1 Marthengrave Steel Lance. Extra damage is only ever important if it makes the difference between a kill or not a kill. Sometimes this did take very careful positioning the turn before for momentum, but Canter and Rewinds made that not that big of an issue. If Alfred ever does fall 1 point of damage behind, a Strength Tonic can solve that for just 100 gold per chapter. Alfred instead comes with 3 higher defense, which for me was actually 5 higher since I already spent a Draco Shield on him. It helped a lot with earlier chapters, particularly the start of Chapter 5, where he was barely able to handle all the sword fighters to the left of your deployment zone, almost all by himself. I think Etier shot one of them at one point. Not to mention Sigurd's ring and food buffs, since Amber can't benefit from either of those in his join chapter. I admit that all these benefits to Alfred painted a skewed picture of how bad Amber is in comparison. He came off as incredibly frail, but a half-decent chip unit to help finish enemies or set up kills for others, though that setting up often left him chunked in return and needing healing. Still, I'll try my best to remove my bias here. The argument can be made that Amber can simply receive the Draco's Shield instead, and while that's true, it's not as good on him as it is on Alfred, due to Alfred's Goldilocks defense. This is best illustrated with an example. Taking 7 damage times 2 normally and lowering that down to 5 with a Draco Shield is much less valuable than lowering 4 damage times 2 down to 2. Higher bulk on units is self-reinforcing. The higher your defense already is, the more hits you can take. The more hits you can take, the more valuable extra defense is, as it can reduce many more hits and the unit can take on even more punishment. The most pushed argument I heard for Amber is that his speed is higher, which makes him superior to Alfred, but on this point I completely disagree, and here's where context comes into play. Amber's speed is 11, 2 higher than Alfred's, and his build is 1 higher, which allows him to be a bit faster with steel lances and javelins, but this is rarely if ever actually helping him. These 2 points of speed don't break any significant breakpoints that help Amber. In Chapter 8, regular enemies like lance fighters have 11 speed, and mages have 10 speed, so neither Amber nor Alfred doubles nor gets double. And sword fighters have 16 speed, so they still double Amber, except that Amber takes more damage than Alfred due to his lower defense stat. The Axe Flyers in Chapter 9 also only have 12 speed, and won't double Alfred, and faster units like Thieves still have more than enough speed to double Amber, unless he gets 2 levels for +1 speed and +2 speed from food buffs that chapter, assuming you're using Sigurd's Ring and can't use a +1 speed ring on him. I'm pretty sure 2 levels by this point is impossible, maybe unless you go back and do multiple paralogs. So Amber's 2 points of speed, in practical terms, nets him little to nothing. It's no more valuable than what Alfred has. This leaves Amber as a less bulky cavalier, worse at pulling units and retaliating, not too significantly better at dealing damage, who doesn't double and gets doubled by all the same targets that double Alfred. At least for the most part, maybe there was something I missed. He does have an arguably much better personal skill, as 20 hit is very substantial against targets with a lot of avoid, at least when it works. Though against most targets most of the time, Alfred was clocking 90+% hit rates, and the skill comes with getting hit more. Finally, Alfred already had something like 9 chapters including paralogs to bond with Sigurd, and is already bond rank 10 with him. Alfred already has the extra defense and build, he already has momentum, and he already has the Brave Lance, if ever needed. Why spend the bond fragments bonding Amber to Sigurd, especially if you plan to dump either Cavalier in another 3 or so chapters anyway? Alfred is already set up to take you to that finish line, and there's little reason to switch to Amber. I think this is a weaker point since bond fragments are relatively plentiful, and the Brave Lance has poor hit rates, but still worth mentioning. If we do want to use either Cavalier in the long run, people mention that Alfred outclasses Amber due to his higher growth rates, and while I agree, it's still incredibly close. These are their growth rates. Technically, Alfred's personal class has slightly higher growths, but it's negligible after promotion. Let's just assume they promote to the same class. More on Alfred's promotion later. While Alfred does have a significantly higher growth total than Amber, in practice it basically nulls out to 0. After 20 levels, Amber gets 1 higher strength, while Alfred has small gains in dex, speed when combined with build, defense, and luck. The only standout is res, where Alfred's higher base and growth will put him a total of 6 points above Amber, which is substantial. In conclusion, Amber goes into can't even control his horsey tier. Lastly, plenty of people brought up that it was unfair to compare Alfred, who was a level 15 unpromoted, to Bunay, who was a promoted unit. I don't think that's entirely correct on its own. Traditionally, coming promoted is a massive upside in a vacuum, since you don't need to use a promotional item, in this case saving you 1750 gold with the silver card. I did look at Alfred's promotion gains, but with his defense staying below Bunay's and all other stats not improving enough to significantly push him over the edge, I concluded that Alfred had fallen off and that was the end of it. That is, until @Johnny McMuffins and later a few others mentioned in the comments that promoting Alfred to Great Knight actually improves his stats far above Bunay's. Wait, really? I didn't think of that somehow, probably because I didn't expect Great Knight to increase his defense more than 3 or 4 points. It actually gives him 7. Compared to Bunay, he now has more strength, dex, and speed, much higher defense, negligibly less HP and luck, his build is shored up considerably, and the only stat he really loses in is res. Alfred is also only 5 XP away from leveling, so if we arena him once before promotion, this comparison only grows more into his favor, especially since it's a really strong level up. I learned a valuable lesson in comparing units within the same class before jumping to conclusions, especially in this game where weapon experience isn't a thing and weapons ranks are fixed. This got me curious, so I then went and looked at Alfred's promotion to General to compare to Louis, and to my surprise, he actually compares super well. Not better, mind you, but right on the borderline of pretty much as good. The same defense and dex, nearly the same HP, res, and build, but higher luck and speed, as I gave Louis a speed wing early on, and only 2 points lower in strength. Also keep in mind Alfred's Draco shield, and that giving boots to Louis helped considerably in the early game. I can no longer take back those boots, so Alfred would be stuck as a 4-move general without the boots I get later in the soul mark. This comparison gets even better for Alfred if we include his next level up again, making him roughly as good as Louis. Alright guys, listen, nobody mentioned that Louis also is only 22 XP from promotion, okay? I'm trying to look smart here, I don't need this. Alfred is good, guys. He's good, I swear, he's good. Why did some of you dislike my last video? I can't handle being disagreed with, please believe me, Alfred is good. If we were to make Alfred a general, his growth rates would see him continue to make gains in dex, speed, and luck, with similar strength, though he would fall slightly further behind in HP, defense, and build. Overall, a slightly less tanky, but slightly less likely to be doubled general, especially if you shore up his speed even more with rings or Lin's plus speed skills. These promotion gains into Great Knight in general absolutely seal the deal for me as a proof of concept that Alfred is viable to be promoted and used even later than I initially gave him credit for. Turns out even I underrated him in my own Alfred is underrated video. It might not be the optimal choice, he may still fall off in the long run, but I think it's undoubtedly viable, at least. The only downside to promoting him this way is that it costs a Master Seal and Second Seal, as both these classes require level 10 Armor Knight. This comes to 3,500 gold with the silver card, which is not ideal, but I found myself swimming in cash throughout this portion of the game, at this point sitting at around 29,000 at chapter 13. And that's with forging nearly every weapon I've used to +1. I know you get 30 or 40 more from each of Solm and Elusia later on too. I'm pretty sure as long as you keep your level 5 forges to a minimum, you'll never run out of money in this game, so the cost overall is minimal. And that's it. Wow, I thought this whole thing would be like 3 minutes long when I thought about it in my head. Just address some concerns and be done with it, but this definitely sprawled out a lot. Whoops. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. In summary, Alfred's still B tier, haters seething, Diamant in shambles. Do leave me a comment, I'll be reading every one, throw me a like if you thought I was accurate, and remember to check out Bambino in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.